The Vietnam War was a profound and turbulent chapter in American history, one that tore the United States apart and left scars that would last for generations. It was a conflict that reached into every home, every community, and every heart, forcing Americans to confront difficult questions about their nation's values and its place in the world. For the first time, the horrors of war were seen every night on television screens, bringing the distant conflict into the living rooms of millions of Americans. The war was no longer an abstract idea, it was real, immediate, and deeply personal. Images of helicopters slicing through the humid air, young soldiers trudging through dense jungles, and burning cities filled the news, forcing Americans to choose sides and creating deep divisions within society. The war became a daily reality, shaping conversations and fueling debates across the country. The United States, confident in its status as a superpower, sent its sons to fight for what leaders called freedom and democracy in a faraway land. But as the war dragged on, many Americans began to question the war's justice, its purpose, and the heavy price being paid. Protests erupted on college campuses and city streets as citizens demanded answers and accountability. Brave young men, many of them drafted against their will, faced an elusive and determined enemy in a war without clear victory or end in sight. The jungles of Vietnam became a place of fear, confusion, and loss. A powerful anti-war movement emerged, challenging the government's decisions and creating a rift that split families, friends, and the nation itself. The voices of protest grew louder, demanding peace and a new direction. The Vietnam War cost over 58,000 American lives, leaving behind grieving families and a nation in mourning. And the toll was even greater for the Vietnamese people, with millions of lives lost and entire communities shattered by violence and upheaval. In the end, the war concluded with the fall of Saigon, marking a conflict the United States did not win, and leaving a legacy of doubt and reflection. It forced America to reconsider its global role, its power, and the limits of military intervention, sparking debates that continue to this day. The Vietnam War remains a complex tale of intentions, consequences, and the immense human cost of conflict, a story that continues to shape the American conscience and its understanding of war. To understand the Vietnam War, we must look back to when Vietnam was a French colony. The French established their control over Vietnam in the mid-19th century, integrating it into French Indochina. This period was marked by significant exploitation of Vietnam's resources and people. Under foreign rule, the Vietnamese longed for independence, a desire that fueled future conflicts. The harsh conditions and lack of freedom under French rule created a strong sense of nationalism among the Vietnamese people. Ho Chi Minh, a nationalist and communist, returned to Vietnam to free it from foreign control. He had spent years abroad, studying revolutionary movements and gaining support for Vietnam's independence. He formed the Viet Minh to fight the Japanese and French, declaring independence in 1945. This declaration was a pivotal moment as it marked the beginning of Vietnam's struggle for self-determination. The French, unwilling to relinquish control, sparked the First Indochina War, ending in 1954 with their defeat at Dien Bien Phu. This war was brutal and costly, leading to significant loss of life on both sides. The Geneva Accords ended French rule but divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel. This division was meant to be temporary, with plans for national elections to reunify the country. Ho Chi Minh led the Communist North, while the US-backed South was non-communist. This ideological divide set the stage for further conflict, as both sides sought to unify Vietnam under their respective systems. A planned 1956 election to reunify the country never occurred, solidifying the division. The failure to hold these elections deepened the rift between North and South Vietnam. This set the stage for the next larger conflict. The unresolved tensions and competing visions for Vietnam's future would soon lead to the Vietnam War, a conflict that would draw in global powers and have lasting impacts on the region. During the Cold War, the United States was gripped by a powerful fear, the spread of communism across the globe. American leaders believed that if one nation in a region fell to communism, neighboring countries would quickly follow, like a row of dominoes toppling one after another. This idea, known as the domino theory, became a central pillar of U.S. foreign policy. It was used to justify American intervention in countries where communism seemed to be gaining ground, especially in Southeast Asia. Vietnam, in particular, was seen as a critical domino. If it fell, U.S. officials believed the rest of Southeast Asia, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and beyond, might soon follow. Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy responded by sending military advisors and support to South Vietnam, hoping to strengthen its government against the communist Viet Cong insurgency. But tensions continued to rise. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, an alleged attack on U.S. naval vessels, became a flashpoint, dramatically escalating American involvement in the region. In response, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting President Lyndon B. Johnson broad authority to use military force in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. Soon after, Operation Rolling Thunder, a massive bombing campaign began, and the first U.S. combat troops landed in Vietnam, marking a major escalation of the conflict. What started as a limited advisory mission quickly transformed into a full-scale war, with American soldiers fighting on the ground and in the air. By 1968, U.S. troop numbers had soared to over 500,000, making the Vietnam War one of the largest military commitments in American history. The nation became deeply divided. As the war dragged on, it grew increasingly costly, both in lives and resources, sparking widespread protests and debate back home. The escalation of the Vietnam conflict marked a turning point in U.S. foreign policy, raising questions about the limits of American power and the wisdom of intervention. As the war's complexity and challenges became more apparent, the United States faced a long and difficult struggle, both abroad and at home. The Vietnam War was unlike any other for American soldiers. The U.S. used advanced technology and a strategy of search and destroy. The goal was to inflict heavy casualties on the enemy. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army excelled in guerrilla warfare. They used Vietnam's terrain to their advantage, launching surprise attacks and blending with civilians. The Viet Cong's extensive tunnel networks allowed them to evade American forces. American soldiers, often young, faced brutal conditions and constant danger. The war's progress was hard to measure as the enemy could replace losses. The Viet Cong fought for unification and independence, willing to endure great sacrifices. For American soldiers, the war felt frustrating and unwinnable. It was a conflict without clear front lines or an end in sight. In January 1968, the Tet Offensive changed the Vietnam War's course. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese launched a massive surprise attack during Tet. They targeted over 100 cities, including Saigon and the U.S. Embassy. Militarily, the offensive was a disaster for the communists, but a psychological victory. The images of chaos contradicted optimistic reports from U.S. leaders. Walter Cronkite's report on the stalemate impacted public opinion. The Tet Offensive shattered American confidence and widened the credibility gap. Support for the war plummeted, and the anti-war movement gained strength. President Johnson announced he would not seek re-election. The Tet Offensive marked a turning point, shifting focus to ending the war. As the Vietnam War escalated, so did opposition in the U.S. The anti-war movement grew from college campuses to a massive social force. Students protested the draft, which disproportionately affected working-class and minority youths. Protests became larger and more confrontational, with marches across the country. Civil rights leaders and veterans joined the movement, adding powerful voices. The country was deeply polarized between hawks and doves. Television brought the war's brutal reality into American homes, fueling disillusionment. The era was defined by profound social and political turmoil. In 1968, Richard Nixon promised to end the Vietnam War with peace and honor. His Vietnamization policy aimed to withdraw U.S. troops while strengthening South Vietnam's military. Nixon reduced American troop numbers, but secretly expanded the war into Cambodia and Laos. This expansion led to intense protests, including the tragic Kent State shootings. Despite turmoil, Nixon pursued peace talks with North Vietnam. The 1973 Paris Peace Accords ended U.S. involvement, withdrawing troops and returning POWs. The agreement left Vietnam's political future unresolved. The U.S. exit marked a fragile peace, with fears it wouldn't last. Nixon's strategy aimed to end the war without a complete defeat. The war's end was a complex and controversial chapter in U.S. history. After U.S. troops left Vietnam in 1973, the peace was temporary. The South Vietnamese government was vulnerable without U.S. military support. North Vietnam launched a final offensive in 1975, quickly advancing. The South Vietnamese army crumbled, unable to stop the North's advance. Saigon fell in April 1975, marking the war's end. The U.S. evacuated Americans and allies in a chaotic departure. North Vietnamese tanks entered Saigon, and the South surrendered. The war's end was a stunning defeat for the U.S. It marked a painful conclusion to a troubled era. The Vietnam War left a lasting legacy on Vietnam and the U.S. Vietnam was devastated, with millions killed and the land scarred. The communist government unified the country, but many fled as refugees. The U.S. lost over 58,000 lives, with many veterans facing indifference and trauma. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial became a place of healing and remembrance. The war eroded public trust in the government and military. It fueled a counterculture movement questioning authority and values. U.S.-Vietnam relations have since transformed, showing a path to reconciliation. The Vietnam War teaches lessons about power limits, conflict costs, and history's complexity.